a man is punched on a pavement outside his own restaurant. The sound, according to witnesses, was like a bowling ball dropped from height onto concrete. Sheriff, 44 years old, owner of the Curry House in Owen Sound, Ontario, hit the ground and did not recover. He died in hospital 1 week later. And the men police believed were responsible? They were already gone. Not just from the scene. Not just from the town. Gone from the country. Thousands of miles away. Back in the United Kingdom. And seemingly, beyond reach. This is the story of how they were found. How they fought their extradition, and how a Scottish sheriff made a ruling that legal scholars are still talking about today. It was the evening of August 17, 2023. 3 men, Robert Evans Jr., his brother Justin, and their uncle Barry Evans, sat down for a meal at the Curry House on 2nd Avenue East in Owen Sound, Ontario. The restaurant was owned by Sheriff, a community figure, a man described by neighbors as warm, generous, someone who had built something real in a small Canadian city. The meal ended in a dispute over the bill. The dispute moved outside. And then Robert Evans Jr. threw a punch. Witnesses described the sound of Sheriff Rahman's head hitting the pavement. Police were dispatched to an ongoing assault almost immediately. But by the time they arrived, Robert Evans was already running. What happened next is where this story gets complicated. Because it wasn't just Robert Evans who made choices that night. His uncle Barry was right there. And instead of staying, Barry Evans drove his car toward his nephew, sounded the horn, and shouted at him to run. Robert Evans got in the car. And Barry Evans drove, not to the hotel he had booked for them that evening, but to Collingwood, a town 40 miles away. The next morning, Robert Busby Evans, Robert Jr.'s father, who wasn't even at the restaurant that night, arranged a one-way airline ticket for his son. Robert Evans Jr. flew out of Canada that evening, bound for Heathrow. Barry Evans and another family member took a flight to Glasgow the same day. Robert Busby Evans Sr. followed a few days later, traveling to Manchester. Sheriff died on August 24, 2023. He was 44 years old. Now here's something worth understanding before we go further, because it matters enormously to what comes later. The Evans family weren't tourists in Canada. They had entered the country in June 2023 on valid UK passports, but under false names. Robert Evans Jr. and his father had entered as Michael and Justin Jones. They had no work visas. During the summer, the family had been operating a cash-only business across Ontario, with the name Toto Paving. When police began investigating the assault on Sheriff, they quickly determined that the suspects had fled the country. What followed was an extraordinary international effort. Owen Sound Police Service, the Ontario Provincial Police, Interpol, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and eventually Police Scotland and the UK's National Crime Agency. On July 30, 2024, almost a year after the assault, Robert Evans Jr. and Robert Busby Evans were arrested in Edinburgh, Scotland. 3 months later, on October 29, 2024, Barry Evans was arrested in Dalkeith, a town just outside Edinburgh. All 3 were remanded in custody. But arrest was only the beginning. Because now came the legal question. And it was a question that quietly, without fanfare, had the potential to rewrite Scottish law. To extradite someone from Scotland to another country, there is a fundamental requirement in law. It's called dual criminality. The principle is straightforward: you cannot extradite a person for conduct that would not be a crime if it had happened in Scotland. In other words, the courts in Scotland must ask, if this same thing had happened here, on Scottish soil, would it be a crime? For Robert Evans Jr., the man charged with manslaughter, there was no issue. In Scotland, the crime of culpable homicide covers all deaths caused by assault. Dual criminality was satisfied without debate. But for Barry Evans and Robert Busby Evans? That was a different matter entirely. In Canada, they were charged as accessories after the fact. The legal definition knowing that someone has committed a crime, assisting them to escape. But here is the problem. Scotland has no equivalent rule. There is no general offence in Scots law of helping someone flee after a crime has been committed. So the question before Edinburgh Sheriff Court was stark. If Barry Evans had been in Scotland, and had driven his nephew 40 miles away to avoid the police, would that be a crime? If Robert Busby Evans had been in Scotland, and had booked his son a one-way flight out of the country, would that be a crime? If the answer was no, both men had to be released, discharged from the extradition proceedings entirely. The defense argued exactly that. Their lawyers pointed out that under Scottish case law, the only recognized examples of a person committing an offence against the administration of justice involved either manipulating or destroying evidence, or helping someone escape from active pursuit, police literally chasing them. Robert Evans Jr. was not being chased. He had not even been identified as a suspect when he left Canada. There was no warrant for his arrest. The defense said, "You cannot extradite a man for helping someone who..." At that moment, the law had not yet come looking for. That was the argument. And it was not a weak one. Sheriff Julius Komorowski, sitting in Edinburgh Sheriff Court, delivered his judgment on July 31, 2025. He disagreed with the defense. But he did not simply apply existing law. He clarified it, in a way that legal commentators immediately recognized as significant. The sheriff worked through a series of earlier Scottish cases and identified what he described as a distraction in recent judgments. Courts had become preoccupied with the question of whether a course of justice was already underway when the alleged interference took place. Sheriff Komorowski said that was the wrong question. In the earlier case of Watson v. H.M. Advocate from 1993, he noted, "The High Court of Justiciary had already made clear, it is not necessary for a police investigation to have begun, it is not even necessary for the matter to have come to the attention of police. For acts taken with the intent to defeat the ends of justice to constitute a crime." He concluded, and this is worth sitting with, that in Scots law there exists a single, broad crime of offending against the administration of justice. It is committed whenever someone takes an improper step, concealing evidence, deceiving authorities, helping a perpetrator flee, with the purpose of avoiding a just proceeding. It does not matter whether police have begun their investigation. It does not matter whether the perpetrator has been named as a suspect. It does not even matter whether any investigation was ever likely to begin. The moment an improper step is taken, with the intent to obstruct justice, the crime is complete. Applying that to the facts, Barry Evans picking up his own documents from the hotel the next morning, removing his guest registration to stop himself being placed near the scene, met the test. Barry Evans driving his nephew 40 miles from the scene of the alleged assault, shouting at him to run, all these met the test. Robert Busby Evans arranging a one-way flight to get his son out of Canada also met the test. The sheriff was careful to add, this decision did not determine guilt or innocence. That remained entirely a matter for Canadian courts. But dual criminality, the gateway to extradition, was satisfied. The three men had initially indicated they would contest extradition on other grounds, including arguments about prison conditions in Canada. On October 20, 2025, they changed course. One by one, in Edinburgh Sheriff Court, Robert Busby Evans, Robert Evans Jr., and Barry Evans each signed a consent to extradition. A woman in the gallery wept as Robert Evans Jr. signed his document, and was handcuffed back into custody. None of the family members commented outside court. On December 11, 2025, 2 years and nearly 4 months after Sheriff Ramon died on a pavement outside his own restaurant, officers from Ontario Provincial Police and Owen Sound Police Service flew to Scotland, collected the three men, and brought them back to Canada. They were escorted by officers from the National Crime Agency's National Extradition Unit and Police Scotland. They appeared before an Ontario court the following morning. Robert Evans Jr. told the judge, "I know what I'm charged with." The community of Owen Sound had waited more than 2 years for this moment. Flowers had been left outside the Curry house. A community fundraiser had supported Sheriff Ramon's family. His daughter. His wife. The people who knew him. They had watched 2 legal systems, 2 countries, and months of hearings finally arrive at the same place. The charges have not been tested in court. These men are presumed innocent unless and until a Canadian jury decides otherwise. But they are home. In Canada. Where that question will now be answered. One last thing worth noting because it often gets lost in the human drama of cases like this. Sheriff Komorowski's ruling in July 2025 did more than resolve a single extradition case. It drew a clear line in Scottish law. Helping someone escape justice is a crime, not because there is a rule that says accessory after the fact, the way Canada phrases it, but because the broad, flexible offense of attempting to defeat the ends of justice is wide enough, and has always been wide enough, to capture it. You do not need an active investigation. You do not need pursuit. You do not even need police to know a crime has happened. If you take steps deliberately to help someone avoid justice for a crime they have committed, that is an attempt to defeat the ends of justice in Scotland. It is, in the sheriff's own words, a crime committed against the administration of justice itself. Not just against a victim. Not just against a court. Against the very idea that justice will follow wrongdoing. Sheriff deserved better than what happened to him on the night of August 17, 2023. Whether the men accused of wronging him will face consequences, that is now, finally, for Canada to decide. If you ever find yourself in a situation like this, your safety matters. Intervention doesn't always mean physical involvement. Sometimes, the safest action is to call for help. To create distance. To avoid becoming part of the escalation. Because once things cross a line, they move fast. If you would like to know how this trial ends, please subscribe and get notification when it does. If you found this video useful, subscribe, and check out our other legal case breakdowns in the description below.